Today we're going to talk about the Battle of Iwo Jima. We're going to look over some history of the island, we're going to look over the prelude to the battle itself, and a little bit of the controversies for the battle afterwards. The Battle of Iwo Jima took place between February 19th and March 26, 1945, and it would be the first time that American forces would land on Japanese home territory. Now, yes, it's not a Japanese main island, however, during that time it was administered by the Japanese capital, Tokyo, so it was technically Japanese home territory, and the Japanese would prove that in every inch of the fight. Prior to the invasion in 1945, there was about 1,000 plus civilians and a small Japanese naval base on the island, and unfortunately in 1944, when the Japanese began to militarize the island in preparation for the invasion, they would move all those people out, and none of them would ever be able to permanently return to the island. Prior to the invasion, the Japanese, under the command of, I don't know how to say his name, sorry. They would begin building miles of trenches and tunnels and hundreds of gun ports and pillboxes for the Marines and the sailors to have to clear out one by one. And they knew that they were never going to win the battle, but they did want to make it as painful as possible for the Americans to take the island. And unfortunately, they were successful at doing this, as this was the first time in the war when American casualties actually outnumbered those of Japanese. American intel reports would underestimate the Japanese population on the island at around 13,000, when in reality there were over 21,000 Japanese forces on the island for the Americans to have to clear out. The report would also fail to understand the terrain of the island, reporting that it was perfect for an amphibious assault, which was definitely not the case, not even close. And they would also underestimate the defense in depth the Japanese had built on the island since 1944. Now, being the good Marine that he was, Major General Harry Schmidt, the commander of Marine forces, would request a 10-day bombardment on the island from the Navy. However, he would be downgraded to 3 days in typical higher headquarters fashion. Now, I'm glad to see after this battle, clearly the higher-ups in the United States military would learn from this mistake and would actually listen to the guys on the ground who were actually doing the thing. Sorry, 1 second. Oh, 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 wait. That's not true. They didn't learn, and they still do that, and they still don't trust the guys on the ground and think that they know better? Oh, okay. Well, never mind. On February 19th, Marines from the 5th Amphibious Corps would land on the beaches and almost immediately get bogged down, creating a bottleneck on the beach. And this would become advantageous for the Japanese defenders when they would begin firing on the Marines sometime later. The Marines would encounter embankments of over 15 feet tall, which they were not able to scale without help from the Navy Seabees coming ashore and clearing these out with bulldozers. Now I know, 15 feet. Oh, that doesn't sound so bad. Blah, 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 blah. Yeah, okay, well, let me throw this analogy at you. You ever walk up a slippery staircase in the winter? Not the easiest thing in the world, not the hardest thing in the world, right? Not terrible. You grab onto the railing and, just pull yourself up slowly, right? Okay. Now, try doing that with 100 pounds of gear on your back. The steps below your feet are sinking and falling apart because they're literally made of ash. You're getting shot at, and oh, also, you can't use your hands because if your weapon touches the dirt, Gunny's gonna beat you so damn bad you're gonna wish that your Amtrak got hit before you even landed on the beach. So, yeah, not exactly an easy thing to do. However, the US Navy was able to land the Seabees and clear out the embankment so the Marines could move forward, and the 28th Marine Regiment would inevitably secure their objective of cutting off Mount Suribachi to the south by the end of that day. General Schmidt and the Marines were prepared for the traditional banzai charges that the Japanese had become famous for at this point in the war, but what they did not anticipate and they were not ready for was the defense in depth the Japanese had set up on the island. But, however, in traditional Marine Corps fashion, as usual, the 5th Amphibious Corps would improvise, adapt, and inevitably overcome the Japanese defenses. But it would take time, significantly longer than the Marines had anticipated, but they would do it. On February 23rd, the 28th Marine Regiment would secure Mount Suribachi despite having to clear out numerous gun ports and capes one by one, and they would raise not one, but 2 American flags on top of the mountain, both being photographed. However, the one you're probably the most familiar with is this one taken by Pulitzer Prize winner Joe Rosenthal. On February 24th, the 4th Marine Division had successfully secured the 1st Motoyama, or as people who actually do win wars call them, airfields. And on the 27th, they would secure the 2nd of the 3 airfields, and they would begin to push north. However, at this point, the fighting would become much more intense as the Americans would push up against one of the main Japanese defensive lines. The Japanese would shell the Marines all day, and at night they would sneak past American lines and try to plant mines to disrupt American logistics, while, Lance Corporal Shit for Brains took his little nap on post. However, even the stupidity of Lance Corporal Shit for Brains really couldn't help the Japanese that much, because even through intense fighting at the Turkey Knob, Hill 382, and the amphitheater, which would affectionately become nicknamed the Meat Grinder, the Marines would push past this defensive line on March 2nd and continue pushing north until they declared the island secure on March 16th. Now, even though it was declared secure on March 16th, sporadic fighting would continue until about March 26th, when the Japanese would launch one final sneak attack against the Americans and kill about 100 Americans that night before the Japanese defenders would all be gunned down. Now, like I said at the beginning of this video though, the American casualties would outnumber the Japanese for the first time in the war, with around 26,000 Americans being killed or wounded compared to only about 18,000 Japanese. After the battle, 27 Marines and sailors would be awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor, and Admiral Chester Nimitz would say of the battle, "Among the men who served at Iwo Jima, uncommon valor was a common virtue." Historians typically fall into one of two camps on this battle. Some say that it was worth it because we were able to use the airfields to bomb Japan and landed over 2,200 B-29s on the island, and some say that it wasn't worth it because we lost a lot of Marines and sailors taking the island. We had initially invaded the island to use it for fighters to escort bombers over to Japan, but we really only did that about 10 times throughout the remainder of the war. Now, I'm not going to give you my personal opinion on the battle, whether the United States should or should not have fought at Iwo Jima. That's for you to decide for yourself. But I'd love to hear what you guys have to say in the comments down below. Thank you to everybody for watching the video, and if you enjoyed it, please leave a like or a comment down below. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say about it. If you'd like to fact check anything that I said in this video, you're more than welcome to do so. I've listed all my sources down below. Have a great day. Thank you to everybody. Oh, geez, that was horrible. Ooh, terrible.